Hello. Last year, around the start of July, I decided to get a copy of David Weiss's Flat Earth Clock app, and I looked at it as fairly cheap analytical entertainment. And I set out to see how many things I could identify or how much I could get out of that app. I made quite a few videos. At one point, I even created a video where I took a year's worth of animation that I made in this video here, wrote a little computer program that would go and look for the position of the sun at any given point, extract the X and the Y coordinates, and export that so that I could load it into a spreadsheet and start doing some analysis. All of these videos are in a playlist that I'm also going to put here. I would suggest you watch those if you haven't seen these videos before. In this one, I was specifically trying to analyze what sort of algorithm David Weiss was trying to use to represent the position of the sun on his flat Earth model and see what kind of information I could glean from that. And in one or both of these videos, I made this spreadsheet available so you could go and download this as well. But when I was analyzing this, I was a little bit perplexed at how David Weiss decided to select the position of the sun over the flat Earth map. And I surmised that one possibility was that David Weiss wanted to implement some sort of three-dimensional effect that caused a parallax, shifting the sun outside of the tropic latitude lines. And it's really bad, at least on the iPad, that the sun goes well outside of the tropic in December, but in June, the sun stays on top of the 23rd latitude, representing the other tropic line. And I think it's these cells over here where I created a bit of a fudge factor to nudge the position of the mock latitude back towards what it should have been in reality. And so that was one mystery that I was trying to solve. At the time I had my iPad mini, I still have my iPad mini, and I also had my iPhone as well. So this layer is a snapshot that I took a few days ago on my iPad, and at virtually the same time, I took a snapshot on my iPhone as well. And the two are different sizes. So what I did was I copied this layer to this one and rescaled it so that when I put the two together, the clock stays at the same size. And I noticed that the size of the needle is longer on the iPad. So if this is the iPhone, you can see that the second hand just goes by the inside of the minute hand marker. The iPad goes well outside that line. The minute hand just barely touches the inner line of the minute markers for the iPad, and on the iPhone there's a small gap. You can see that the hour hand needle stays on the inside of the two tropic boundaries. Here it's a little bit harder. I'll zoom in, but you can see the tip right here is outside of the line for the tropic. So given the two devices, it seems to scale the size of the needles differently based on the two. So that was one thing that I was trying to solve. And you may also have just noticed that the position and the size of the moon is different on the iPad. Here, the center of the moon should be roughly right around there. And on the iPhone, the center position of the moon should be right around there somewhere. So that's another mystery I have yet to figure out. I was at a bit of a loss to try to figure out what was going on there and how the developer could have been doing that. One of the obvious things that I thought of was maybe it has something to do with the aspect ratio, and maybe in the code, the developer decided to look at the width rather than the height, and that was causing things to go a little bit skewed. Maybe the vertical height as opposed to the horizontal, which could have skewed things differently as well. I wasn't really sure exactly how the developer went about doing that. I only had a sample size of 2, and there were all sorts of possibilities that I had to try to eliminate. Earlier this year, MCToon, FTFE, and I think somebody else, I don't remember, were talking about Dearth's app. And at one point, MCToon showed the app on his iPhone. So then I reached out to MCToon and I just asked him if he could send me a screenshot of that and send it to me so that I could use it for a bit more of an analysis. So I created this spreadsheet and I went and I found a database that somebody had created with all the different iPhones, iPads, and whatnot that Apple ever put out, along with their screen resolutions. And that's where I got it from. Copied that information over to here. And then I used GIMP with a measuring tool to essentially measure the length of the hour hand like this. And I started with mine, my iPad and my iPhone, and I did a few other things along the way. And I was trying to look for various patterns. I was trying to see if I could eliminate screen resolutions or if I could eliminate other factors. And at one point, I was even thinking maybe the developer created not one, but multiple images that they use to draw the various needles. And depending on the screen resolution, they would say, I'm going to choose this small one or choose this bigger one instead. And that's going to be an important thing for later. But I ended up trying to analyze this every which way that I could. And I was drawing a blank. Nothing seemed to really make any difference that was in any way definitive. The iPhone that I was using is the 11th generation iPhone I bought back in 2019. So the phone is 4 years old, and according to the OS, the battery capacity is at 82%. And so now I'm able to do another analysis with a different screen resolution. So here is MCToon's phone. Here is my iPhone 11. Here you can see that the iPhone 11 is not as big as MCToon's. I think he said he has, or he had, the 13 Pro Max, and the 15 is an even higher resolution. So now I've got 3 different iPhones that have the same aspect ratio with different screen resolutions. So I took MCToon's phone layer, I copied it. So unfortunately, the needles are not pointing in the same direction, but I did manage to kind of correct that here. And I also resized the iPhone 11 layer to be the same size as the 15. And this is where things get a little bit interesting. So I took MCToon's phone layer and I duplicated it. I just removed the needles from his so that I could then duplicate this other layer and rotate the needles so that they all point in the correct direction to match my other ones. Now we can see how each of the phones match each other. When I enable MCToon's rescaled phone layer minute hand needle, his appears shorter than mine. So the needle is longer on mine, and there is a bit of debate in my mind whether it's the same one or not. I'd have to look at the aspect ratio between this part of the needle and its length to see if it's really the same one. So his is longer than on my 15. If I look at the second hand, his second hand needle is longer than mine. So these two are in agreement. On MCToon's iPhone 13, these two needles are longer relative to the background image than the iPhone 15 is. And this is where things get interesting because this is on mine and the hour hand needle on the 15 is longer, although probably not by much if you look at this here. The 15 seems to have a longer hour needle, but the iPhone 13 seems to have longer minute hand and second hand needles. Doing a blink test, it looks like the average width here is the same between the two, but this needle appears to be longer. So a couple of possibilities. The developer has stretched the needle for this, distorting the aspect ratio, so the width of the needle is the same, whereas the length is not. And the second hand needle seems to be somewhat similar as well. The hour hand is not quite as easy to figure out because it looks like it may be uniformly a different size. So a smaller image, but maintaining aspect ratio. If I compare the 15 to the 11, the 11 has longer needles. For these two, the 15 has shorter needles. If I compare the hour hand, the 11 has a shorter needle and the 15 has a slightly longer needle. And the size of the moon seems different. It seems to be not at the same latitude, but it does seem to be in roughly the same longitudinal coordinates. So what does all of that mean? I've been looking at this and I've been trying to analyze how the developer could have gone about doing it. It seems to me that the developer has chosen to provide different size clock needles for different size devices that they're using. And based on a screen resolution, they might choose size A, B, or C, for example, and then finish scaling to some appropriate size. That could possibly explain why the difference between the 15 and the 11 has the hour needle larger and the minute and the second hand needles shorter. In comparison, if I look at the iPhone 11 versus my iPad seems to have a longer second hand, minute hand, and hour hand needle compared to my iPhone. And so what does that really mean then? When I developed my own equivalent flat Earth clock app that was actually accurate, although projected on the azimuthal equidistant map, I wanted a single source for each of the needle images that I could then apply to the various sizes. When it comes to maintaining the best resolution and minimizing the amount of aliasing, it's always better to start with a much larger size image and scale it down than it is to take a small image and try to scale it up. So I created a single 2044 by 2044 image for all three of the needles. And with the center of the needle in the middle of the image, I can rotate the image any which way I want from the center. And with a transparent background, I can just apply that image on top of the others in layers and I get a very similar effect. I only resize the needles when I get a resize notification, for example, when it does this. And so I can scale it up just about any size I want to something extremely absurd like that. And all the layers are scaled proportionally to each other. And really, that's about it. This probably isn't all that much of a criticism of what David Weiss's app is really trying to convey, but it does seem to suggest why his app was so buggy for so long. If the developer that decided to write the app chose different size images for different devices it was running on, which suggests to me that that is the case, rather than take a single larger size image and scale it down for a very specific device that they're on, suggests of that developer's overall programming knowledge, shall I say. I've yet to analyze why the position of the moon on the iPad is somewhere around, I'd say 7, maybe 8 degrees of longitude off than the others. That seems to be based on something completely different. But I would say that that is even more evidence that suggests the possibility that whoever David Weiss hired to write this clock app may not be quite as experienced as somebody else. And at the end of the day, doesn't really address the fundamental issue that this flat earth clock app doesn't really represent reality as David Weiss at one point claimed and possibly still claims in the application's description in the App Store. So hopefully you've enjoyed my little foray into trying to analyze this little aspect of David Weiss's Flat Earth Clock app. If you like the video, I would certainly appreciate the thumbs up, the subscribe, comment below, all that other good stuff. And if you didn't like the video, feel free to comment below as well. With that, I'm going to see you again in another video soon enough. So bye for now.